because you feel sorry for anyone or are angry at them. 4, remember, the lawyers are not on trial. Your feelings about them should not influence your decision in this case. 5, your duty is to determine if the defendant has been proven guilty or not in accord with the law. 6, whatever verdict you render must be unanimous. That is, each juror must agree to the same verdict. 7, your verdict must not be influenced by feelings of prejudice, bias, or sympathy. Your verdict must be based on the evidence and on the law contained in these instructions. 3.11, cautionary instruction. Deciding a verdict is exclusively your job. I cannot participate in that decision in any way. Please disregard anything I may have said or done that made you think I preferred one verdict over another. 3.12, verdict. You may find the defendant guilty as charged in the indictment or guilty of such lesser included crime as the evidence may justify, or not guilty. If you return a verdict of guilty, it should be for the highest offense which has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt. If you find that no offense has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, then, of course, your verdict must be not guilty. The verdict must be unanimous. That is, all of you must agree to the same verdict. Only one verdict may be returned as to each crime charged. The verdict must be in writing, and for your convenience, the necessary forms of verdict have been prepared for you. They are as follows. 3.12, A, subsection A, single defendant, multiple counts. A separate crime is charged in each count of the indictment, and although they have been tried together, each crime and the evidence applicable to it must be considered separately, and a separate verdict returned as to each. A finding of guilty or not guilty as to one crime must not affect your verdict as to the other crime charged. The verdict. I don't believe you have that in the package. I have it here. The verdict starts out, has up at the top the style of the case. That's what we refer to as the style of the case. It reads, in the Circuit Court of the 17th Judicial Circuit in Fort Broward County, Florida, case number 19-001872, CF10A, Judge John J. Murphy, State of Florida, plaintiff versus Jamel Devins, defendant, verdict. Count 1. We, the jury, find as follows as to the defendant in this case. And it goes on, parentheses, check only 1. A, the defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the indictment. B, the defendant is guilty of manslaughter, a lesser included offense. C, the defendant is not guilty. Goes on further, it says, if you find the defendant guilty of any of the crimes listed above, you must answer the following questions. 1, during the course of the crime committed, did the defendant, Jamel Devins, actually possess a firearm? Then you check the appropriate box, either yes or no. Goes on, paragraph 2, during the course of the crime committed, did the defendant, Jamel Devins, actually discharge a firearm? You check the appropriate box, either yes or no. Question 3, during the course of the crime committed, did the defendant, Jamel Devins, actually inflict death or great bodily harm to Anthony Williams as a result of discharging a firearm in his possession? Again, you check the appropriate box, either yes or no. The verdict form goes on. Question 4, did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt the defendant committed the crime for the purpose of benefiting, promoting, or furthering the interests of the criminal gang? Again, you check the appropriate box, either yes or no. And then it goes on and says, so say we all this blank day of blank AD 2023 at Fort Broward County, Florida. There's a place for the foreperson to sign and date the verdict form. Then there's a second verdict form for count 2. And again, it has a style of the case up at the top, and it reads, verdict count 2. We, the jury, find as follows as to the defendant in this case. Check only 1. A, the defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree as charged in the indictment. B, the defendant is guilty of manslaughter, a lesser included offense. C, the defendant is not guilty. Then goes down further and says, if you find the defendant guilty of any of the crimes listed above, you must answer the following questions. 1, during the course of the crime committed, did the defendant, Jamel Devins, actually possess a firearm? Again, you check the appropriate box, either yes or no. Question 2, during the course of the crime committed, the defendant, Jamel Dennis, actually discharged a firearm. Again, you check the appropriate box either yes or no. Question 3, during the course of the crime committed, the defendant, Jamel Dennis, actually inflicted death or great bodily harm to Christopher Thomas as a result of discharging a firearm in his possession. And then again, you check the appropriate box either yes or no. And it goes on. Question 4, did the state prove beyond a reasonable doubt the defendant committed the crime for the purpose of benefiting, promoting, or furthering the interests of the criminal gang? And again, you check the appropriate box either yes or no. It goes on further, says, so say we all this blank day of blank AD 2023 at Fort Lauderdale, Broward County, Florida. And again, there's a spot at the bottom for the 4 persons to print their name and sign and date the birth. Is there any objection to the instructions in published in open court by the state?
Yeah.
By the defense?
No, sir.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to go to the second page of these instructions. It's called Closing Argument 2.7. And it reads as follows. The state and the defendant have now rested their case. The attorneys now will present their final arguments. Please remember that what the attorneys say is not evidence or your instruction on the law. However, do listen closely to their arguments. They are intended to aid you in understanding the case. Each side will have equal time, but the state is entitled to divide this time between an opening argument and a rebuttal argument after the defense has given its closing argument. Madam State?
Yes, ma'am. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I can get up here before you and say the defendant is guilty of murder in the first degree. I can say that because you have sat through 16 days of testimony, and because back when you first started here, some of you as early as April 10th, you agreed to follow the law. And the law is clear that this defendant committed 2 counts of first-degree murder. I now have the opportunity to explain all of the evidence, because sometimes you get it piecemeal. What does this piece mean? What does this mean? So this is where we have the opportunity to show you how everything fits together. So I want to start, but I also want to thank you for showing up. You received a summons. You complied with it. You came to the courthouse, and you decided to do your civic duty. We appreciate that. As I said before, we cannot do our jobs, and this judicial system does not work without you being here.
Counsel, can I see a second?
Yes, ma'am.
Ladies and gentlemen, I just received a message that one of your members needs a restroom break, so we're going to take a short recess. Do not discuss the case. Don't form any opinion about the case. Don't allow anyone to discuss the case in present. Please just give your notepads and your jury instructions off your chairs. Thank you. Mr. Dennis, you ready to read?
Yes, sir.
Good? All right, we're in recess. Thank you.
Of this data,
had an opportunity to get up and,
they drove off and then he went into a different car.
you know, Jesse, what is it with these young kids?
So he then showed you the Blue Star. And if you recall, the investigation starts on October 26th of 2018. We have 2 dead bodies that are dropped off at Memorial Miramar. Christopher Thomas and Anthony Williams. We have Portland Henry, who's lying about anything and everything. He's lying about the location of where it happened. He's lying about when it happened. He's lying about Mr. Demmons, the defendant, being in the car at any point that evening. Totally omits that. We then have the cover-up that begins. So the question is why? Why does there need to be cover-up? Because there was a murder that was committed, ladies and gentlemen, that's why. There were 2 murders that were committed. And so from here, we're going to talk about and explain what we have, right? So Detective Moretti and the Miramar Police Department have to answer 4 questions. Who, what, when, and where. And so for the where, I want to start with where did the lethal shots come from? And let's start and focus on that part of the investigation. So the where, we looked at Chris Williams. If you remember, Sergeant Williams came in and testified and showed you how Blue Star works, showed you how shooting reconstructions are done with the trajectory rods. This explained how Miramar had made a good attempt, but they lacked training. So he came in and went through and is able to explain, as an expert in shooting reconstruction, what happened in this car. So we're going to start on the trajectory rods. If you recall, on the outside, the most important aspect of the ones on the outside of the car is they show that this was not a drive-by. That they're coming in at 90 degrees, that there's no keyholing. If you remember, you learned about keyholing, that would be an angle of entry on that. So he then showed you the Blue Star. And if you recall, ladies and gentlemen, this chemical reacts no matter how many years later, no matter what attempt at cleanup is done, the chemical is still going to react to the presence of the blood. So then you have that reaction. And that reaction, ladies and gentlemen, tells you that someone is sitting in this seat. Because, as Detective Williams illustrated, it's where the Blue Star isn't. So there is no blood. There's no blood where someone's would have been sitting. There's no blood where their legs would have been, and you can see on the V that's indicated on that. And there's no blood on the back of the seat. So ladies and gentlemen, what does that tell you? The killer was sitting there. And there's no blood because something was blocking it from getting onto that area of the car. So what do we know as well from this car? We know that there's also that this door was closed. How can that be said? Because, ladies and gentlemen, the Blue Star here shows that this door was shut because there is blood on this door handle. You have from this as well the headliner. So the headliner shows directionality. The headliner shows the way Anthony Williams' head was positioned when he was shot. That's one aspect of it. That DNA that was tested is all Anthony Williams, but we'll get to that. So the DNA, very strong support. 51.2 septillion times more likely to be that of Anthony Williams than any unrelated individual in the world. That was from Kurt Rhodes. If you recall, he was the expert on DNA. He told you and taught you how DNA is done, how everything works. So now putting those 2 things together, you can say, and the evidence shows, Anthony Williams, the way his head was in that Jeep, is that he is sitting in this front passenger seat, and as you can see, all the blood is dripping down the back of the seat. That tells you, ladies and gentlemen, and from the angle of entry when we get to the medical examiner's information, that his head was right here. So then we have one of the things that Detective Williams relied upon was the shirt of Cortland Henry. If you recall, there is a spot of blood on the front of the shirt. That blood, as Kurt Rhodes then told you, belongs to Anthony Williams. What does that tell you, ladies and gentlemen? That during the course of this shooting, Cortland Henry has his back against the driver's seat, and is driving wearing this shirt when the shooting occurs. You know from that he is not the shooter. Why? Because if he was the shooter, the angle to get that wouldn't have the blood on the front of the shirt. It would have it coming across the driver's side and towards the side of the shirt, not the front. So on here you have the blowback coming there, and that's, again, 32.2 septillion times more likely to be the DNA of Anthony Williams. So then we have the back of the shirt. And so if you recall, the blood on the back of the shirt is right here. And that blood, Christopher Thomas, a single source profile. So what does that tell you, ladies and gentlemen? That tells you that Cortland Henry didn't fire the fatal shot for Christopher Thomas. Here's why. That blood is coming from Mr. Thomas when he is shot. The blood's only moving like that, as you heard from Sergeant Williams, when there is a pulse, when there is pressure. Remember the garden hose analogy that he used and talked about? That's when you're getting the blood that's going to be coming out of the body. And on that, so from there, you know, Cortland Henry is ducked over and flinching away from Christopher Thomas. So he cannot get that shot on Christopher Thomas from where he is sitting in the driver's seat. Even if he was in the back seat, let's argue that for a second. To get the blood there, he would have to have been completely turned facing backwards to Mr. Thomas and then turned and shot over his shoulder to get blood on the back of his shirt. And now look at the time. Remember we talked about the UTC? So subtract 4. So UTC 2,000 hours. You subtract 4, 1,600 hours. You do the conversion. So 4 p.m. 4 p.m. I did that with the smiley face. And that's what I said in opening. Context is key. The whole floor is coding. Awesome if you work at Google. Terrible at Broward General Hospital. Context is key. So you've learned Peasy Gambino, as you heard from Detective Moretti, is potentially facing federal firearms charges, the gun dealer, is told by the defendant, I did that. Shh. And look at the messages between Mr. Demmons and Mr. Gambino. Peasy Gambino is a blood gang member. Uses all those same information, slang words, changing of the letters that you learned about from Detective Polo. October 26th, he asks and reach out to see how the defendant's doing. And the defendant says, I did that. And to make a spelling that, other times he uses DAT. Ladies and gentlemen, you saw the song where he has a song that he's released called THAT in his phone. So again, Instagram and how these all fit together. 6:58 a.m. Jamie King, RN, the defendant's mother. Are you here? I'm in Miami. I'm by the stadium. I'm a mess. I'm so worried. I'm here. Well, remember those CDRs where you get sent her to voicemail? Ladies and gentlemen, this shows that she's trying to contact her son. He is ignoring her, and so she's reaching out to her son, who responds back with, I love you, Mom. I'm good, Mom. Because he had the phone at that point. So the judge read you the law. Anthony Williams is dead, and it was premeditated. Ladies and gentlemen, I submit to you the evidence very clearly listed evidence at their feet where they were sitting in that Jeep. No private confession. Because remember, all of these online threats, they're out there for the public because they're trying to get attention and trying to get some sort of benefit for that for themselves. Distasteful? Yes. A crime? No. There's no drop pins for an emergency pickup from any of those individuals. There's no phone for any of them at any of the scenes in this case. So, motive. We talked long and hard how we don't have to prove motive. Motive, it's intent. Intent is an action of the mind. So I'll give you motives. Anger, greed, resentment, advancement in the gang. You heard $16 million was coming into Jameson Francois, and that you saw $15,000, $10,000 payments going to Mr. Demings. Simple math. Splitting something 4 ways or 2 ways with Mr. Henry, who wasn't smart enough to even properly give a statement to keep Mr. Demings away from the car. So we have all these pieces of the puzzle that we have just talked about. And each and every one shows how this case has been brought together, shows the physical evidence. And so, ladies and gentlemen, there's no murder weapon, right? The question that you have to answer, and that you can now answer based on all of this evidence, is that Jamel Demings was sitting in the back seat of that Jeep. And he was the one that fired the fatal shots that killed Christopher Thomas and Anthony Williams. And you know that because even if you choose to disbelieve one part of the evidence, 2 parts of the evidence, you can see what the overall picture is. The overall picture puts Mr. Demings in the back seat of that Jeep. It puts him holding a gun. You don't need a murder weapon to know that he committed these 2 crimes. Ladies and gentlemen, I would ask that you serve justice, that you deliberate, and that you return a verdict of guilty as charged as to murder in the 1st degree. Thank you.
Damn, she
coming hard. She is coming hard. I wonder if they're gonna flag this video. Let me skip.
Now, the case is not being turned over to you for deliberations at this time. The same admonition I gave you before, and every time the rule remains in full force and effect. You are not to discuss the case. Don't form any opinion about the case. Don't allow anyone to discuss the case in your presence. And certainly no research. Just leave your notepads on your chairs and hold those jury instructions. And we'll see you back in an hour, 15 minutes. All right, so we'll see everybody back at, let's say, no later than 1:30, all right? Thank you. Nice one.
Better not be smiling enough. They don't like that.
Any thought about the, what I was asking about?
Oh, I haven't even discussed it.
Okay, so.
I'll have an answer right after, before they come in, of course.
Anything else to discuss this time?
No, sir.
Yeah.
All right, see everybody back at 1:30, right? Yes, sir. Fair 1:30. Thank you. Have a nice lunch.
Man, they dragging this out, man. Yeah.